It's Brian. It's Tuesday morning. We are back. It is the Art of Startup War. I have another fantastic company that we invested in because we believe that this company is going to be the change that legal services have needed for years and years and years to democratize every single document you could ever require in legal on your laptop for any consumer anywhere, right? That's the plan. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Tell me about the genesis of Woodpecker. Where did it come from? Did you wake up one morning and you're like, I'm struggling with legal, or was it just a slow, gradual realization that the world needed a better system?
It was much more the latter. It was very much a case of seeing that there obviously was a problem in legal, just like there is with a lot of other industries where it's sort of lagging behind in a lot of the technical aspects. And there were a numerous number of products out there trying to solve sort of the legal document problem and legal document automation problem, but for specifically, let's say, solo and small firms within this country and others, which ultimately make up about 90% of the total firms, there were no options, and the options that did exist were far too expensive, far too difficult to implement, and the industry hadn't been innovated on in, say, 30 years.
Yeah, and the area that you're specifically looking at is the simplification of all of the documents and forms that lawyers, attorneys use, right?
Exactly. The idea is to ultimately help attorneys productize their services through standardizing and automating frequently used legal documents that anyone from an SMB to a startup to whoever might need to use, even consumers at the end of the day, whether it's a will or it's an NDA or it's divorce paperwork. The idea is to ultimately automate and standardize this stuff and turn it into products that ultimately these law firms can provide to folks.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely brilliant. I always remember when my attorney called me on this and he said, I have got this phenomenal startup company. They already have hundreds of attorneys that use their documents. They simplify everything. I'm like, okay. But Chris, how do you know this thing even works? And he said, because I pretend to take ages to do documents for you that actually take a tiny amount of time because I use their software. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm really happy. And then he introduced me to you.
Yeah, exactly. And Chris has been awesome. He was obviously he's a customer of ours, and he is definitely one of the pioneers of the legal industry, and we're working really closely with him to automate and standardize as much of the stuff as we possibly can.
I agree. He is the man when it comes to the future of. And the future of, in this case, what does it look like? So you started off by taking, I'm sure, one legal document. And you said, and I've seen it, you do what you do with the convertible notes or the safes, which is incredible. Literally, if there is an attorney, this podcast is mainly for investors. But if you are an attorney out there and you deal with safe notes or you deal with convertible notes, for God's sake, make sure you are using Alex and the team over at Woodpecker. You will. How much time would an attorney generally save using your technology?
Yeah, we typically say that it depends on the document. It depends on the document set, but we usually see anywhere from 70 to 80% in terms of time savings, right? So what might have taken you 8 hours to prepare an incorporation packet or fundraising documents, and you can now do in, an hour or 30 minutes.
It's ridiculous. So for attorneys out there, from my mouth to God's ears, it is 100% true. You can save up to 70, 80% of your time completing notes. So I saw the notes and I saw the safe. Were they the first documents that you simplified and built the technology for?
We didn't. We actually started with more generic sort of business formation documents, corporate formation, NDAs, things like that. We then sort of graduated to trust and estates, wills, living wills, things like this. And then now we've most recently come into financing documents, like you said, safes, notes, fund formation docs, things like that.
Wow. And how have you seen, obviously you've got attorney after attorney after attorney signing up. How has that been? Was it difficult at the beginning, or how did you manage to get such a big following so quickly?
Definitely difficult at the beginning, and I'll be the first to say that the legal market is definitely tough. Right, you're dealing with folks that are really smart and really discerning, but are also wary of technology in a lot of aspects. Not only from the sort of worry underlying that they're going to get automated out of the job, but also for the fact that a lot of the stuff is really difficult to learn, and that's
Let's
part
be
of.
clear. Let's be clear. The majority of attorneys still have rotary phones, okay?
Yeah, exactly, right?
And I don't mean that in a bad way. They like their rotary phone. They're used to their rotary phone. They can use their rotary phone better than anybody else can use it. And also, they come from a world where you still sign documents, right? Your
Right.
signature is seen as your bond. So
Right.
for to move into the next century with technology, many are very resistant for a lot of reasons, which are reasonable reasons, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they are. And specifically, historically in legal tech, right, most of the legal tech software out there and even solutions out there has been designed by attorneys, not necessarily for attorneys. And so what we see out there, right, is a lot of folks that have experienced problems with existing legal tech solutions over the years where one day the solution will disappear because the company goes out of business, or even they spend a lot of money trying to onboard one of these solutions and it's just too damn difficult to learn and it takes 6 months to 2 years to actually onboard this stuff. And it's because it's not designed like a SaaS product should be. It's not designed the way that other products in other industries are, and where folks are getting really a ton of value out of these really low barrier to entry and easy to use systems. So the idea has been, let's give folks something that's really easy to use, really low barrier to entry, meet them where they work every day, which is Microsoft Word. That's sort of our flagship landing zone, is let's make this just insanely easy to use and low barrier to entry. And ultimately, as we expand out of Word, that's when it starts to get really interesting with this consumer-facing aspect.
Okay, great. And then so you built up the first 200 people. It was difficult at the start, but you somehow convinced them. And then how has your traction been since then?
So traction has been really good. What's interesting that, obviously we can't really talk about this stuff without mentioning the current economic and global situation with coronavirus. But what's really interesting is that we're seeing adoption grow. So we've had our largest monthly active user month last month ever. We had our largest new user sign up quarter ever in Q1 this year, and the reason is, yeah, so it's awesome. But the reason is that when as all sorts of stuff is happening around us, legal services don't go away. If anything, they increase. But what the problem is that as even the legal industry evolves and as the economy sort of does whatever it's going to do, folks can't afford to hire people, right? Whether it's a paralegal or an assistant or even maintain the size of their team, but they still have to continue delivering these legal services just as they have been, if not more. And that means automation, and that means technology. So we find ourselves being adopted and brought into these situations that may not have brought us in a year ago, but now are being forced to, because this is the way that ultimately things are going from the legal perspective today, but they're not going anywhere. This is the way the industry is moving in general.
Wow. Okay. And then, so where do we go in the future? So you've built it up to a couple of hundred attorneys that can easily go to a couple of thousand attorneys. You can easily evolve out to more documents and kind of, is the brand to become the go-to place for simplification and cost savings for every document that an attorney will ever use, or is there a bigger market?
Good question, and I think that that's absolutely true. The idea is that ultimately we become the sort of one-stop shop for any legal document generation that someone might need to do, but with an add-on of, say, maybe I need additional legal services that accompany this document. Maybe it's a will, maybe it's a financing document that I want someone to walk me through and I want support on. And so the idea is ultimately to give attorneys the ability to productize their offerings, give them additional revenue stream, allow them to reach more people in a really automated and standardized fashion, but also provide their legal services on top of these things. So sort of think of like an automated, in-depth version of LegalZoom with additional attorney services layered on top if you need it.
Brilliant. Because the challenge, I suppose, for attorneys and for consumers is that 99% of people are not going to use an attorney at times when they would have liked to have used an attorney, right? Because they're going to be terrified of the cost, because they're going to feel they're going to be taken advantage of. And then also because the problem is when you start using an attorney, you never know It's like trying to lift a rope from the ocean, right? You never
Exactly.
know where the end of that rope's going to be. So it's
Exactly.
not like if an attorney was going to say, hey, if you come to me, it's going to be $200. You'd be like, okay, maybe not. Maybe that would increase adoption from 1% to 15 or 20%. But that's
Right.
not the case. The $200 is like the first letter, which might then have a reply to another letter and so on and so on and so on. So I
Exactly.
suppose where this gets really exciting is not even just where attorneys can actually get access to that other 14% or 29% or whatever the number is that would love to use attorney services if it were affordable, but also directly out to consumers themselves and let them find attorneys after getting the documentation they want, if they so desire.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head there, Brian, with a couple of things. One of the major issues historically that's plagued the legal industry and has been sort of a major roadblock to innovation is the billable hour. And what technologies like Woodpecker are doing now and will do in the future is allow attorneys to take what might have been a billable hour, which honestly doesn't work for most folks, right? Consumers don't like it. Attorneys don't necessarily like it because it's hard to convince someone on, but it allows them to take that same work and turn it into a flat rate. And when you turn something that you know how long it's going to take, you as an attorney, into something that's flat rate, one, your consumers or your clients like it a whole lot more, and they know what they're getting into. Plus, you can do more of them in an automated fashion, ultimately being way more profitable. So the idea that is sort of underlying all of this is that the billable hour is something that's sort of been hindering this industry for a long time, and it is fundamentally going to change because of technologies like this, where folks are enabled to ultimately standardize their own services.
It's perfect. And then look on the great side. Consumers get a better service, fit to purpose, at a really low cost when they need it to be a really low cost. Attorneys have fewer jokes said about them at dinner parties, which
Exactly.
is like better. So everybody wins on this. No, I
Exactly.
love it. And then, so how big is this market? Let's speak specifically to investors now. So I think everybody gets the idea of what the size of the market is. Everybody gets the idea of what you're doing and how it affects attorneys. I want now for you to lift this from being individual features, individual products, into being one large company, and paint a picture of how you grow from a few hundred attorneys who use you through to building it up to a company that's doing $100,000 in revenue plus a month, and then how you build that up to a company that's going to be doing $1 million to $10 million a month. What does that look like, and what type of raises are you going to do between now and then?
Sure. Good question. So the idea generally is it's very product focused, right? And the idea is to ultimately utilize the existing distribution channels we've built with our existing attorney user base. And ultimately, as we start to turn into more of a platform that's connecting attorneys to end consumers, that sort of addressable market of consumers starts to blow up. So obviously, we're going to start in the U.S. And Canada, obviously, because they're very similar. Next, after that is from an international perspective, Australia and New Zealand actually are where the sort of second highest concentration of customers we have are, and it's because the legal systems there are very similar to ours, except that the regulations are less. So you can, for example, be you don't have to be an attorney to start a law firm in Australia or New Zealand. So the idea ultimately, right, is to, as we expand the product offering and as we expand out to the consumer-facing side of this, the market starts to explode from obviously any sort of simple use case like a will, anyone needing a will generated for them or their estate or their family, through to SMBs that are actually generating, anything from an NDA to licensing agreements to financing documents. So we think that the stepping stones here are very much going to follow the product trajectory, and ultimately, what brings us to this next hump is enabling the existing user base we have to ultimately standardize and publicize their own content, ultimately kind of following a DocuSign model where just by sheer virtue of interacting with us, you now have heard of Woodpecker, right? Because you're a consumer filling out some form that an attorney has given you and generated these documents for you. And then ultimately, once we become sort of this central platform where attorneys are basically crowdsource generating documents for our platform and making money on those, the possibilities and the growth trajectory are really quite large.
Yeah. And I see it. I see that first jump as being a very easy jump. As you move from, a few hundred clients, which is very, very impressive for an early stage company with extremely small, you haven't really raised any money other than friends and family and us, right?
Exactly. Yep. Mainly friends, family, and a couple of angels and you guys. Exactly.
Right. And you built it up already to a few hundred paying attorneys.
Right.
Now, if you have a few hundred paying attorneys, it is only a hop and a skip to get to 1,000 paying attorneys, right? It's just a question of how much does it cost to find these attorneys so they can know that we exist, right?
Right.
And then you're getting your SaaS revenue of your $100 or whatever's coming through. So we can automatically see how you can build a business up to $100,000 a month, right?
Right.
To go from $100,000 to $1 million a month, I agree with you. I think it's going to be really, really interesting as you democratize this entire platform. First of all, adding on to the additional services so people can get this full suite, and certainly attorneys can get this full suite of services, but then taking that extra step to saying, how many people live in America? How many people live in New Zealand? How many people live in Australia? How many people live in the UK? And how many of those people would love to have access not only to every single document they require to run their business, but to very simple technology that allows them to fill in those documents by literally answering questions. So rather than looking at a 35-page document and thinking, oh my God, they would instead have a questionnaire, as yours beautifully lays out, saying, what's your name? Where do you live? Where do you come from? Who's the person that you want to speak to? What do you want to speak to them about? Give us a line here that will go in line 27, subsection 2. What type of company do you have? And then it just beautifully parallels into the document. And then like Shazam,
Exactly.
the document is filled out, right?
Exactly.
So tell me, anyone, and I know you're very specifically B2B, but shoot, even if folks are looking to get a divorce, I mean, listen, those documents are like everything. You can have every single document, litigation with partners, people trying to sue the company, people coming after the company. And again, it's very important, and I know, Alex, you always remind me to do this, but we always say to people, look, whenever something dangerous or extremely important is happening, you should always get an attorney's advice, right? This is not us telling you to drink bleach to try and clear the coronavirus out of your system, right?
Right.
This is about us saying this is serious, and if you make a mistake, you're in trouble. However, a lot of these things that you're doing cost a tremendous amount of money, and they cost money because you know nothing.
Exactly.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could lift up your knowledge level and A, if you have no money, you have a solution, right? Your only solution is not to do nothing. And then B, if you have a little bit of money, you can bring your costs way down by actually executing the documents you need to execute and then checking with an attorney afterwards to make sure it's okay before you sign anything.
Exactly. And that last piece is the most important, right? Which, there's plenty of document generation services out there that will do very specific things for you, where you fill out a web questionnaire and you get a document at the end of the day. But what's missing, right, is the communication and the connection between that end user and that consumer and the attorney on the other end, right? So, right now it's extremely abstracted and there's no connection whatsoever. So the idea for us is to not replace attorneys at all. The idea is for us is to give them another route, give them an extra, bring them into the future by allowing them to, like I said, productize these docs. And ultimately, as a consumer, if you needed help or you needed extra, guidance on some specific issue, you could click a button to add an a la carte hour with, the attorney that wrote this document. And the idea ultimately then, right, is that you're, instead of flying blind, generating a doc off of some website and then, using it and realizing a year later that your attorney says, well, you've got all these holes in it. The idea is to prevent that entirely and ultimately bring the attorney in up front without a, endless timeline and endless billable hour, I should say.
Yeah. So you give people choice, and who's not going to want that? And what kind of pricing model are you bringing in? I know you already have a SaaS model, a software as a service.
Exactly.
Which is for the attorneys. How's that going to change, or is it going to change?
Yeah, good question. So our pricing, first of all, is I always say it's fluid because we're always running experiments, we're always adding things, we're taking customer feedback. Right now is we've got a few different tiers for different sort of segments of our market, and it's all SaaS based. It's all monthly or annual contracts. up to, restricting on number of users and usage of various features. But as this evolves, the way that ultimately I'd like to see it go is that if we're giving you, attorney, the ability to productize your content and your services, I'd like to see it go a combination of, say, a SaaS model plus a transaction fee model. So let's say that on your website, you have, let's say you're an attorney and you have two options. Either embed our widget on your website and enable any clients you have or future clients to ultimately buy these packets of documents for you, and a la carte add on an hour of your services for each one. That's one option. The other option is maybe we host those documents for you, and ultimately you're contributing to this sort of marketplace that ultimately consumers are then consuming, and still with that a la carte legal service option on top. But the idea is that if you're an attorney selling your documents for $200 plus maybe an hour of your time for $300, we can get a percentage of that transaction and ultimately layer on top transaction fees on top of, say, a subscription model to actually use our platform in general.
Wonderful. And then I'm sure there are investors out there who are thinking, I think that I've seen other platforms do similar type things. Talk to me a little bit about the competition. Talk to me about the differentiation between you and anyone else out there, and why Woodpecker on its own is a standaway winner in the space that you're going into.
Sure. So we have to, when we're talking about competition and sort of incumbents, we have to break it into a couple of different buckets. The first is the first that we've gone after, and that's the folks that we've been competing against that are sort of the historical legacy legal document automation platforms that have been around, let's say, since the 80s or 90s, haven't really done anything different or innovated since then. They're mainly enterprise focused. These are the platforms that take anywhere from 6 to 24 months to actually set up, which I know sounds insane, and it's because it is. And these are the legal document automation players that we've been going against, that we're winning against, hand and foot. Now, as we start to talk about the use case of productizing these attorney services and making them available to the consumer side of things, from that perspective, there are, as I mentioned, there are folks that, you can go to a website and generate an NDA by filling out a questionnaire and having it emailed to you. That's not a problem. That's pretty easy. All of those solutions are pretty siloed. They're meant for very specific use cases. They're not really very broad. Not to mention that, you might have one for startups. You might have one for wills. You might have one for financings, but there's nothing that brings them all together. And secondly, the biggest problem with those is, again, that there is no option for attorney services on top of it, unless you took one of these docs you generated from one of these websites and brought it to your attorney, who is then most likely just going to be, just going to say, let's start over because I don't know where this came from. Now, in terms of the sort of end of this, where it's a consumer-facing ability to generate these docs and, again, add on legal services on top, there is nothing out there that does that. So there's sort of a spectrum of incumbents and competitors that exist in the space at each one of these use cases or parts of the use case.
Beautiful. So right now there's a window, and that
Exactly.
window allows you to sprint. How fast are you going to sprint, and what type of money do you need to do that?
Good question. So we want to triple by the end of the year. We'd like to triple our ARR by the end of the year with this existing sole and small firm market, and basically expand that distribution channel as much as possible. And then by next year, we'd ultimately like to start rolling out this consumer-facing product. And we think that we definitely need to raise our formal seed by the end of the year. That's the plan. And then after that, likely will be a Series A.
Wonderful. And then the seed, what are we looking at? 1 million, 1.5?
We're probably looking, between 1 and 2 million. It's probably going to end up being, 1.5, 1.75.
Right. And then that allows you, and how many documents do you think you can simplify? How many do you have right now? And how many do you feel you can simplify by the end of the year? And then how does that look next year?
Sure. So right now we've probably seen anywhere from, we've probably seen between 80 and 100 different types of documents across all of our users and sort of use cases. Again, we've been mainly focused on trust and estates, financial setups, whether it's financings or fund formations, as well as corporate formation. Those are sort of main bread and butter areas. But after that, right, the idea is, well, let's blow this up. Let's go into things like, divorce documents. Let's go into SMB docs, right? Let's go into partnership and licensing stuff. And ultimately, by the end of this year, we'd like to have that number up to 500. And then the year after that, we'd like to have it up to a couple of thousand.
Wow. And then by doing that, you're uncatchable from everybody else outside. Yeah,
Exactly.
I love this idea. And then what would you share from your perspective? Kind of if you're looking future 3, 4, 5 years and you're looking back at what you've achieved, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, what Woodpecker as a company looks like, where you are in the value chain, how you've helped individuals, and what kind of size you can grow to. I mean, can this be $1 billion company?
Good question. So I think the overall goal here, right, when we look, if we look back 3 to 5 years from now, what we will have accomplished is we will have significantly brought the legal industry into the 21st century, specifically the solo, small, and medium firm segment of the market, right? Not so much the AmLaw 100s, but the majority of the firms out there that are really keen on and interested in and innovating and need to. And we will have also lowered the barrier to entry significantly for the consumer side of things, right? So where today you would have to go visit an attorney and pay, anywhere between, thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars to generate a given set of documents for, fund formation or wills or whatever it is. Now that barrier to entry has been significantly lowered, which means that access to these things now is available to everyone, right? You pick your use case of document set, and the majority of people that need to have these things aren't getting them. And, I hesitate to use the term access to justice here, but there is an element of lowering the barrier to entry to these things such that folks can access them and afford them, right? Whereas, a startup today is not going to go pay $50,000 to have, a set of documents generated for them because they just can't. So the idea is to ultimately lower the barrier to entry for the consumer side of things. Now, where this goes long term, the goal, right, is to build ourselves up and like I said, to accomplish all the goals I just mentioned. I don't know that this is not a $1 billion goal. But I do think it's a several $100 million exit opportunity for, say, another legal tech provider out there, or even a more generic consumer-facing platform that ultimately is interested in getting into the legal space and/or having control over a platform that connects consumers with legal in a really streamlined way. And the idea there, right, is that if we can, set these sort of distribution lines, that we have a connection that's very streamlined between consumer side of things and the legal side of things, we can ultimately then push products to these folks indefinitely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love how you focused on, we the people, because folks need protection and we're very ignorant. And I say we, including me. Look, I see legal docs all day, every day. What do I know about legal docs? Nothing. I haven't been trained from a legal perspective. And I'm one of the smarter people when it comes to legal docs. Imagine some person in middle America that's sitting and they're going through some difficult business situation and they have a litigation with a partner and they pick up the wrong form because they go to some website which happens to have a free form that they just advertised at the start. Like, you don't want that. You want it to be one area, one place. You come, you trust the documents, you trust the format so that you're able to then fill out things and send it off to people. And you trust the fact that you can get access to any attorney anywhere that can actually help you with this, right? So I love that you're doing that. I also, one of the things I've liked about you since the first time we spoke is that you are extremely careful about the words that you use. It's very easy for anyone to say, oh yeah, we can be $1 billion company. But there are very few people who measure out what it takes to become $1 billion company. Now, in my book, the difference between a $300, $400, $500 million company and $1 billion company is nothing. It's an irrelevancy, right? It's a margin of small points error when you're actually working to what you're going to become, because you can literally go any way when you get to that thing. It's a great exit. But what I love is the fact that you're focusing on building your users by multiples so then you can have a strongly revenue generating company that brings in really good profits as well. And that's where I see this going. So I think, look, from an investor perspective, I couldn't be happier in what we've invested in. Our money is safe. For additional investors out there, if you understand the legal space, this is going to be a no-brainer for you. You're going to get on the phone to Alex straight away because you know how archaic the documentation is in that space, and you know that sooner or later, this is going to come. You'll also know that there's nobody else other than Woodpecker who are actually doing anything like this right now. So let's finish off the podcast with your contact details, please, and final words to everybody listening on why Woodpecker is a great investment choice.
Definitely. So, yep, like Brian introduced me at the beginning, my name's Alex Melehy. I'm the founder and CEO of Woodpecker. You can reach me at amelehy@woodpeckerweb.com. It's just AMELEHY. You can also visit our website, woodpeckerweb.com, and shoot us an email there. There's probably 10 different ways you can get a hold of us, but that's my email. And then, what was the second part of your question, Brian?
The second part is your last comments to investors about why they should engage.
Yes, thank you. So the last piece here is, Woodpecker is taking advantage of a industry problem that has existed for a very long time and no one's done anything about, and we're perfectly positioned both in timing, in terms of timing, in terms of technology, to take advantage of this hole that's existed. And it's also the perfect time because what might have taken 5 years for the legal industry to adapt to, now as a silver lining to the current economic situation, is happening in a matter of 6 months. So the acceleration of the legal tech industry and legal in general is happening much faster than people predicted, and so we're perfectly positioned to take advantage of that right now. We just need some help to do it.
I love it. Alex, it's a pleasure, my friend. To greatness, to greatness.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap.